Think about outlaws. There's always something fascinating and romantic about people who live beyond the law, isn't there? History is full of outlaw heroes who acquire some kind of celebrity status that lives on long after they've died. In America, it was Jesse James. In Britain, it was Robin Hood. But this is the place where the most famous Australian outlaw of them all fought his final stand, and which turned Ned Kelly from a local bushranger into a worldwide hero, complete with his homemade helmet. But what really whets my appetite is that we're going to try and discover the truth behind the legend, bullet by bullet. Because for the first time since Ned and his gang stood on that spot 130 years ago, we're going to scientifically excavate the place where it all came to a head. So can we discover the real Ned Kelly once and for all? What do you think of Ned Kelly, a hero or a villain?
Ned Kelly.
I think he was a bit of a legend.
Murdering swine.
A bit like a Robin Hood of Australia.
I think of him as a hero.
Is he a nice man?
No.
Have you heard of Ned Kelly?
No. A hero and a bit of a villain.
He was a great guy. The cops were crooks.
Not heard of him at all?
No.
He was a hero. He wasn't an outlaw.
Best thing for him was a short rope and a long drop.
Nothing excites people's passions like Ned Kelly. It's 130 years since he rode these ranges with his gang, and yet still people are divided today between those who love him as a champion of the people, a sort of Aussie Robin Hood, and those who simply dismiss him as a vicious criminal, a murderer, who certainly doesn't deserve all the Hollywood movies and award-winning novels and tourist souvenirs and all the rest of the fuss he continues to generate. Yet, for all the fuss, could new insights into the debate lie under here? Could the opposing views even be reconciled? It all whets the appetites of our experts. Ian, you've been one of the country's leading experts on Kelly for decades. What really impresses me about Ian, I have to say, is that he wrote the first draft of the Mick Jagger film about Ned Kelly. But what is it that attracts you so much about the character that you've stayed with him for virtually all your adult life?
I started 67 years ago when I was 10, and I read a book which portrayed Ned as the unbeatified saint, the greatest hero who ever lived. The police as the villains. I thought, this is fabulous. Robin Hood, eat your heart out. I read another book about Ned Kelly, and he was the villain, the police were the heroes, and I realised if I wanted to find the truth, I would really have to dig it out for myself.
Alex, you're a bit of a young intellectual Turk as far as Kelly's concerned, aren't you? Is it fair to say that you think that Ian puts a rather romantic gloss on the man?
I guess the emphasis is a little different. I'd say perhaps he's a heroic villain to me.
But Adam, these guys are just academics in their ivory towers, aren't they? You're the bloke who does the real hard work, gets his hands dirty. You're the lead archaeologist on this site.
That's right, Tony. Where you're standing is the actual location of the Ann Jones Inn, the site of the siege, the capture of and the destruction of the Kelly gang in 1880.
You know, I find that really extraordinary. What we've got here is just a vacant lot, isn't it? And yet this is as important to you guys as Little Bighorn or the site of the Battle of Hastings.
Well, that's right. It's one of the most important historic archaeological sites in Australia.
It's so exciting. This is like fantasy archaeology. At the climax of the infamous siege, the hotel was burnt to the ground. Later, it was built over.
This photo that was taken on the day of the siege shows the inn, shows the veranda there. The bedrooms are add-ons at the back, and that's Ann Jones's residence there, and we want to try and put a trench in there and find a little bit more about her.
First, we have to strip off the topsoil and see what's under there. Souvenir hunters have been over the site, so at this stage, we really don't know whether much remains. But after a couple of days digging, we're revealing what at first glance look like brick walls. Adam, it's tempting to think that I'm walking along the foundations of Ned Kelly's hotel, but I'm deluding myself, aren't I?
Yeah, well, you are a bit, actually. The brick foundations of the 20th century wine shanty built in the 1920s. What we have got, the original elements of the inn are quite ephemeral. We've got a dip in the ground where a sill beam or a base beam used to sit, which held the floorboards, and we got some of the burning coming up. Now, we'll be working further off in that direction and hopefully finding more solid evidence of the original inn.
It's a start, and the historians are getting into Ned's background. What kind of little boy was Ned, do you think?
There's a wonderful glimpse of him as a champion of the weak at school. A kid called Dick Shelton, who was about 7, lost a hat in the creek and tried to rescue it. Ned was passing, dived in, rescued young Dick, and became quite a hero in town.
His heroism was rewarded with this green silk sash, also a link to his Irish roots. Ned was proud of both, and was even wearing it 15 years later at Glenrowan. It remains stained with his blood. When Ned was 12, his dad died an alcoholic. For his mum, Ellen, simple survival became the priority. So at Greta, she operated an unlicensed pub.
She probably has to start selling sly grog in order to help make ends meet. With her family's sort of shanty subcultures already around her, Ned's going to be moving into a world which is haunted by sort of shady characters.
Frustratingly, rain slows the dig right down. But despite that, there's a great find.
Check that out.
What is it? Is it a bullet?
Yeah, it's actually a Martini Henry cartridge case.
What's the first tangible evidence that we've got of people blasting away on this site?
Oh, exactly.
Next door to the dig site, Gary the blacksmith is getting on with a replica of the famous Ned Kelly helmet and armour. He's using metal plate thick enough to keep out the bullets. But more of that later. We're finding more Martini Henry police bullets.
Oh, wow, look at that. That's a whopper.
And there's other spent ammo. The finds put to rest our fears that souvenir hunters might have cleared the site. But now we need help from forensic analyst Henry Huggins. Adam, I never thought for 1 minute that you'd be able to excavate as much evidence of the actual shootout as you have. You must be over the moon.
Oh, yeah, it's great, and such a variety of ballistics.
What have you got?
Well, we've got a mixture of small arms, so pistol cartridges. Of course, we've got the Martini Henry cartridge, which is the colonial rifle. We've got musket ball, so we've got a mixture of breech loaders and muzzle loaders.
Can you give us any more detail, Henry?
When you get a cartridge case, it's what calibre is it, and then whether it's been fired, and then you can start to look at the firing pin impression, which will be different in every weapon.
So it's a kind of autograph. It tells you which cartridges have come from which guns.
That's right.
Do you think you might be able to get evidence of the Kellys?
It might be possible. Corrosion is going to be the big problem. It's very hard to read.
Is it worth a try?
Oh, yes, it's worth a try.
Henry's got his work cut out for him if he's to make these faint markings prove that one of these bullets was fired by Ned Kelly, which would be great. But the big question remains, was Ned Kelly a nice outlaw with a social conscience? So some things about Ned being a social outlaw, as the experts like to call it, seem to be stacking up, don't they? He was poor, he was brave, as we can tell from that story about him rescuing the boy who was drowning. So if he was being assessed by a social worker today, would he simply be described as a misunderstood boy with an alcoholic father who was looking for a positive role model? And he found a role model of sorts, though perhaps not the best sort. In 1869, Ned took up with an infamous bushranger, Harry Power.
He looked odd. He wasn't big, he was quite dumpy, and he had dreadful bunions, and he used to wear boots that were much too big, and they'd turn up a couple of inches at the toe, and he'd tend to waddle along. But once he got on a horse, very different figure. Brilliant horseman, brilliant bushman, and these were things he could coach Ned in, and also introduce him to the value of having a great circuit of sympathisers to provide you with support.
As Ned rode the ranges with Harry, he moved outside the law. In 1871, he was convicted first for assault, then for horse theft. Aged just 15, he was sentenced to 3 years, 6 weeks of which were spent in solitary at Melbourne's notorious Pentridge prison.
It was such a brutal and harsh regime. You imagine they were imprisoned in solitary confinement for 23 hours of the day. The hour they had exercises, they were kept away from each other. They had to wear these felt hoods over their faces as they moved along. They weren't allowed to speak. There was no noise between them and the warders unless it was an order.
What do you think the emotional impact would have been on a teenage boy being incarcerated in a place like this?
I think it would have been extremely brutalised by the experience.
This picture was taken towards the end of his sentence. Only 19, to me, he looks really hardened. After 3 law-abiding years, Ned started stealing horses again. But the vital question is, does he rob only the rich land-owning squatters, like an Aussie Robin Hood, or his own kind, the poor selectors? Was it a bit like stealing high-end cars and changing the plates and taking them elsewhere?
Yeah, it was, in the sense that you couldn't just turn up at the end of the block at the end of your street and take off with it. You had to have blokes 100 mile away with paddocks ready for you to put the horses in, change the brands, have them resold, pick them up again, move them on out. It's not something that most selectors in the region would have been happy to see, because it's not only the rich men and the rich landholders who are losing the stock.
I'm unaware of any evidence that Ned and the gang were knocking off stuff from any selectors, apart from guys they had something of a grudge against. Like, they're described as respectable farmers, which suggests they're more in cahoots with the squatters and the police than they are with the Kellys.
I'd actually say there's probably about 80% of the selectors would have come under the respectable moniker, and those who are on the other side are living more in the shanty culture.
This would argue against
the fighting and gambling sort of
This would argue against the Kellys' gigantic support and popularity with the selector class.
Yes, it would,
once
exactly.
they were outlaws.
Yeah, and I don't think there was gigantic support amongst the selectors while they were outlaws.
The police did not agree.
We'll get on to that later. These two, they just row and row and row all day.
There we go.
No.
Yeah.
But is the archaeology helping clarify these contradictions? For one thing, we're finding upmarket objects, ceramic bottles, coins, even costume jewellery. What does this tell us about the hotel and its Irish owner, Anne Jones?
The picture I'm starting to get of this hotel here, this inn, is that it's where the smart money's going. Anne Jones is an illiterate woman from Ireland who's got out of the boat in about 1852, and she's got ahead. And she's prospered.
Oh, I think the sign says it all. Mrs. Jones's Inn, best accommodation. And she thought, yes, I can see I can make some money here. So she made her hotel the best inn that she could.
It's not some primitive little frontier shack. It's actually a classy joint.
The fact that an Irish woman like Anne Jones was doing well may indicate she wouldn't have been an automatic Kelly supporter. She may well have seen Ned as trouble, not a people's hero. We're in the year 1877. The town begins to grow. Anne Jones starts to do rather well with her hotel business over there. Over in that direction, a few kilometres off in the town of Greta, the Kelly gang are still nicking horses. But now, things start to turn a bit ugly. What happened was notorious enough to figure in the world's oldest feature film. It shows Constable Fitzpatrick assaulting Ned's sister. But he was there to make arrests after the horse-stealing racket was exposed. Fitzpatrick ended up wounded. But it's Ned's long-suffering mother, Ellen, who's arrested and charged with attempted murder. Ned and Dan Kelly go on the run. Soon they're joined by Joe Byrne and Steve Hart. Hiding in the woods, his mum's been thrown in jail, the police are after him. It's very easy to see Ned at this time as some romantic kind of social outlaw whose family and whole class are being oppressed by the state. But then something really dark happens. Camped in these woods near Stringy Bark Creek, 4 police sent out to search for the Kelly boys were suddenly ambushed by them. The gang shot 3 coppers dead, the other escaped to tell the tale. Can you see, though, why the Kellys would have been so angry if it's at all true that they'd been consistently harried by the police and their womenfolk had been harried by the police as well?
From what I've read, the police paid constant attention to the Kelly family because they were of the belief that they were committing crime on a regular basis, with stealing horses mainly. They were just being investigated as suspects for crimes in those days.
What Peter's saying is a million miles away from your vision of Ned as a freedom-loving, downtrodden hero.
Well, not really, because here he is stuck out in the bush with his brother, and he learns that 3 police parties are converging on him.
3?
3. He thought there were 3.
So how many police did he think were out there?
13. And he'd heard that some of them had been bragging about their readiness to shoot him and his brother.
If you can imagine being at that campsite and they're just going about their normal daily duties, and then they see people suddenly arrive and they're armed and they're pointing guns at them, the first reaction as police is to defend yourself.
Alex, what kind of people would these police have been?
All 4 of the police members who came out in the search party were all Irishmen. One of the policemen makes an interesting observation. This is McIntyre, while he's being held hostage by Kelly. He begs for the lives of the other 2 policemen to be spared. He says, they're Irish, yeah, your parents are Irish, they're co-religionists of yours, yeah, they're Catholic too. He said that the line that Kelly kept saying most, that seemed to mean most to him, was, I'll show them what one native can do. And when he said one native, what he meant was a native-born Australian.
Ned's fear and loathing of the police overshadowed any sense of shared Irish brotherhood. And there was also this new, almost primitive sense of the Australian nationalist in him. Stringy Bark was a turning point. The moment those 3 policemen went down, it was a whole different ballgame. Nothing would ever be the same again for Ned. Now he was officially an outlaw with the death penalty on his head. So he and his teenage gang did what you'd expect a bunch of bushrangers to do. They rode off into the bush and vanished. But then something happened which turns this whole notion of Ned simply as a gun-toting outlaw completely on its head. Now a new Ned Kelly emerges, who's gone from killing Irish coppers to embracing politics, and Irish politics at that. During the robbery of a bank in Jerilderie, New South Wales, with Joe Byrne's help, he composes a rebel manifesto. It says that he wants to rise old Erin's Isle, which I suppose is Ireland, once more from the pressure and tyrannism of the English yoke. What else can England expect? And this is pure Fenian. This is the IRA talking, isn't it?
It is, and it's amazing how Kelly's managed to take his little personal conflict and feud that is happening up in northeast Victoria and sort of throw it up on the biggest possible stage that he can find.
With fantastic rhetoric.
Yeah.
This is a guy who had virtually no education, and yet his phraseology, it's really meaty, isn't it?
It's drenched in rebellious Irish talk, convict talk and outlaw talk.
What were the circumstances in which it was written?
He came to Jerilderie because the New South Wales police boasted that if he crossed the border, they would capture him. So he proved them wrong by holding up the entire town. And he held it up to basically rob the bank, but also to get this letter published in the newspaper. This was his attempt to tell his own story in his own words. This document was a cry from the heart. It was a blood-curdling appeal to rebellion. It was also a statement of insecurity in some ways, but it was about him being the great man.
But as ever with Ned, there's a teeny problem. If Ned's heroic idea was now to ferment open rebellion, who would he rebel against? Obviously, the British colony of Victoria. Trouble is, Under its radical leader, Graham Berry, Victoria was already revolutionary.
Berry was the outlaw premier, and he threatened to dissolve the whole bounds of society. And I've got here something to illustrate that. You've got a cartoon here done in a conservative paper, and this, believe it or not, is Ned Kelly, the old, bit of a thug with a gun. And you've got Berry, the premier, there, and you've got this little old maid, an interfering sort of radical maid, The Age, which is the cheap, progressive, radical newspaper at the time. And just have a look at the flag that they're all dancing around.
So these are all allies dancing around the flag of communism.
Exactly. Ah! Terrible insurrection threatens. And look what it says at the bottom.
Our rulers. The actual rulers of the state of Victoria were really far more radical than the man of the people who was espousing radicalism out in the countryside.
Graham Berry was one of these politicians who was saying, I'm on the side of the selectors. I'm on the side of the poor men and the hard workers.
He was using the rhetoric of Obama, wasn't he?
The phrase, yes, we can, I can imagine it coming out of Graham Berry's lips.
This reveals that, ironically, Ned was perceived by some as an ally of the ultra-left-wing colonial government. But while Berry would journey to London to try to persuade the British to back the power of the people, Ned's grievances would lead him to violence, for which we've more and more evidence.
I think it's a possible percussion cap for a pistol.
See the strike on it? Well, you know Ned Kelly's gun. I mean, that was a much older style revolving carbine, which probably would have had separate percussion caps.
Could this tiny object provide a direct link to Ned?
And interestingly, there's 3 weapons that have been identified as definitely being involved in the siege. But the exciting thing is that all those 3 weapons are attributed to Ned Kelly's personal collection.
On the heavily corroded cap, Henry's going to seek telltale signs of a firing pin impression and compare that to those made by the original weapon, if by a miracle it survives. If we can, this could be massive, just like Ned's growing fame as he bided his time in the bush. Since the Stringybark Creek killings 4 months previously, the police had been rounding up all known Kelly associates. 15 years was the sentence that you got if you were found guilty of helping them. But following the bank raid on Jerilderie, the reward for their capture had increased to £8,000. That's more than 2 million Australian dollars, nearly £1 million sterling in today's money. Kelly had achieved outlaw superstardom. In Kelly country, all this escalated the sense of bitterness and grievance, and in response, Ned's own radical plan was evolving. It would involve the creation of his enduring symbol. This is the original.
It's the original.
Oh, it's a bit of a privilege just to carry it, although I have to say, it is very, very heavy. I think I'm going to give it straight back to you. Oh, boy, that is some weight. You really wouldn't have wanted to stick that on your head unless you were slightly mad.
I'd go so far to say that this armour here, it's almost entirely symbolic and psychological, the purposes that it's serving. It's kind of like an early 11th, 12th or 13th century Crusaders get-up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or a Middle Ages knight.
And of course, the intriguing thing is that this image was entirely and specifically created by Ned himself.
It comes entirely out of Ned's brain. Joe Byrne himself, during the shootout at Glenrowan, is reported to have said to Ned, I told you this armour idea was a stupid idea, it'd get us all killed. And it's pretty clear that there's one person who's had this idea, and that's Ned.
In June 1880, after 16 months on the run, the gang, complete with their armour, rode out of the bush and into Glenrowan. Glenrowan Station is a few hundred metres in that direction, but the reason that the gang were here wasn't simply because this area was the epicentre of support for the boys, but more importantly because this steep embankment up here with this curving railway line at the top of it was at the heart of Ned Kelly's master plan. What exactly was the plan, Ian?
to create a republic of northeastern Victoria.
You mean that Kelly was going to initiate a revolution?
Yes, a full-blooded revolution with a declaration and everything. It's crazy. I mean, it's a mad idea.
Yet to overthrow the government, Ned wasn't planning a siege at Glenrowan at all. No innocent lives would be risked. But there would have to be deaths, starting with one of the gang's best mates.
They were going to kill Aaron Sherritt at Beechworth up in the Ranges. He was a leading sympathiser, a lifelong mate of Joe Byrne, but they believed, quite inaccurately as it turned out, that he had betrayed them. That would bring a police special up to the northeast along this line. It'd be the only train running on a Sunday. No ordinary trains ran on a Sunday. Not only that, but you had this curving embankment where a train, after the long climb to Glenrowan, would start to accelerate and could be approaching 60 miles an hour by the time it hit this curve.
Imagine a couple of trains coming down here, 20 horses going down, the threshing, the screaming, the shrieking, the dying. You got the police, you got the journalists. This point here would have changed Kelly and how Kelly is seen for all history.
The plan to derail the police train depended on one thing. Did the gang have the strength and the skill to break the rail? The answer was no. The great revolutionary plan, if they had one, wasn't starting very well. This is why the siege happened here in the first place. Ned was forced to head into the village, where things only got worse.
There was a row of tents along here just outside the railway reserve. So Ned and Steve thought, OK, we'll get the railway blokes to break the line. So they bailed them up and they got to the foreman's tent. The foreman, Alfonso Piazzi, had a woman in bed with him.
He's an Italian and he has a woman in bed. That's really stereotypical, isn't it?
You could say in the middle of a Glenrowan winter, that is, yes, that's really...
Pretty practical.
It is. Mr. Piazzi got very upset and grabbed a gun. Ned knocked it aside. The gun went off. The woman screamed. Total shambles.
It's suddenly become a French farce.
It has.
In the middle of this really scary business.
That's right. But they now have to do something about the whole town because the shot and the scream will attract attention.
I mean, I think if you look at this map that was taken during the siege and the inn's on fire, you can clearly see the smoke. We've also got this post and rail fence, which was the northern boundary of the rail reserve. What I want to do is I think that the rail reserve fence runs pretty much along where this track is now. And at least some of these tents are in here and going across the road. Now, obviously, we don't want to open the road, but I would like to put a trench in here. And remember, they've been here for about 6 months. So, yes, it's ephemeral and it is a bit of a long shot, but there's potential that we might find some of their rubbish, personal items that they just discarded in that time.
That's good. The gang now had to work quickly. They had no idea how soon the alarm at Sherritt's killing would be raised and when the police train would come through.
Ned immediately made a beeline for the Glenrowan Inn up here on the corner.
Why did he go there?
Well, you see, the inn on the other side of the line, McDonald's Hotel...
Oh, there were two pubs here?
That's right. They were friends. That was safe. But Mrs. Jones was an unknown quantity. The key location of the siege
is right here.
Right here.
We finally got Aunt Jones's pub coming up here. So who would these respectable drinkers have been who were in here when the Kellys burst in?
They rapidly gathered a clientele of all levels. They eventually had allegedly 62 people.
So we've got practically the whole village bailed up here. What did they do?
Ned was very conscious of having a bunch of terribly bored people here while the hours ticked away, waiting for this police train that wasn't coming. And he started trying to entertain them, and he staged sporting events.
What sort of sports?
Well, he did hop, step and jump. And Ned did the hop, step and a jump with a revolver in each hand to sort of give him a bit of balance and weight.
With the village captive, no one could raise the alarm. And with the line broken, the police train would speed past Glenrowan to meet its doom. Question is, has Adam met his own archaeological doom in his attempt to find any evidence of the campsite? Adam, I've been really sceptical about whether you'd be able to find any evidence of the gravel contractor's camp. Was I right to be?
Well, no, actually. I think if you see here, we've got 3 post holes in a line, and one's actually got a post still in it, and I think that's the post and rail fence of the rail reserve that we got.
Basically, that's all you have got.
Well, actually, no. We've got, if you look over here, Tony, I think we've got potentially evidence of the camp. We've got a piece of metal artefact there, which it could be a sardine can, so that could be detritus from the gravel haulers' camp.
So this could be the very can of sardines that the Italian boss was using to feed his lover in bed when the Kellys burst in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So where are we in the story? Forgetting that flight of fancy for one moment, Ian, we've got the Kellys whisking all the gravel contractors over to the hotel, yes, holding them hostage along with virtually the whole town. Yes. And then what are they doing? They're playing hopscotch and drinking. It's not much of a revolution, is it?
Not until the little rebel army converges on Glenrowan, over near McDonald's pub.
You keep talking about this mysterious second pub. Do we know anything about it?
McDonald's Hotel, which is actually the place where Kelly and his mates drank for most of the 1870s when they weren't in jail.
So we do know there were sympathisers there?
You had anything from 50 to, some say, 150 men converging on Glenrowan.
A rebel army? This is Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, isn't it?
Well, I'm a little sceptical as to evidence, but if, like I say, if you're going to find any sympathisers, any signs of them, you're definitely going to find them over there.
Adam, this is the site of McDonald's Tavern, right?
That's right. So we're walking through the tavern building now.
Is this about the back wall?
Yep, that'll be right.
And coming through the stables?
So coming through the stables, there's a little breezeway in between the 2 buildings, and then you're coming down here, you're in the tavern, which faces onto Gladstone Street in front of you.
Jeremy, you're the state historic archaeologist. Where would it be appropriate for us to put our trenches in?
I think you're better to target some of the smaller features, like the stables at the back. It's a pretty important archaeological site, this one. It's on the National Heritage List.
We're certainly not going to be able to dig the whole thing, are we?
No, we haven't got the time to do that.
If we're going to find the stables, what will we see in the ground?
It may have hard-standing floor, so brick. It may even have a forge or some fireplace in there, so we might even find evidence of that.
Why would we want to dig them?
Well, some of the gang's horses were there. Joe Burns and Dan Kelly's mares, their pack horse, and in the vicinity, you had the keg of blasting powder that the gang were going to use to blow up the railway line on the other side of Benalla.
Alex, evidence of insurrection.
Well, I'm still yet to be convinced of any large-scale insurrection, but if we find something, it'll be a start.
It's there. It's got to be there. OK, guys, you ready? We'll see if this dig can prove whether Kelly had somehow hidden a rebel army in the pub across the road. Over at Ann Jones' pub, it was now the best part of 24 hours since the murder of Sherritt, yet the police train had still not passed through. Ned had already released 21 hostages and now allowed this man to leave to join his family. Thomas Curnow, the schoolteacher. A short while later, around about 2:30 a.m, Curnow heard the sound of a train approaching, ran along the track holding a candle and stopped the train. Ned and the hostages must have heard the sound of the train pulling up and the police getting off right here. But there was no crash, no explosion, and no sound of a train coming off the rails. The siege was about to enter its final phase. The Kellys had been discovered. They were cornered. And Adam's now got a much more complete picture of the space they were trapped in.
Behind you was the dining room, where Ann Jones had her finery, lace doilies on the tables. Then you got the main bar, which goes to about here. And then beyond that, to the further to the west, is a small parlour, a quiet area. And these two, there's bookend brick chimneys on either side of the inn.
So what's the shape of the bar?
It was a rectangular structure, and it was going maybe about 3.5 metres by about 4 metres. Basically, we'd be walking up the middle of the bar until we get to about here, where the counter was, where you'd stand, have a pint, have a chat at the end of the day, go behind that the counter, you're into a doorway leading through the back wall of the main inn proper. So that's where we're standing now.
That's the back wall of the pub bit, but that's not the back wall of the whole building.
No, that's right. So if we go through a little corridor that led into 2 bedrooms on either side of us here, and these are like a lean-to add-on at the back of the building.
So where's the back wall of the house?
Just here.
Oh,
so
yeah, you can see these.
See the posts there?
Poles, yeah.
And then beyond that, you would have had a narrow gap called a breezeway, and then you're onto Anne Jones's residence here.
What strikes me is how small it is. Whenever I think of the story and the shootout, I imagine a huge hotel crammed full of people.
Well, that's the thing about legend, doesn't it? It expands everything. I mean, Ned Kelly himself is a larger-than-life character, and I presume the hotel, of course, has expanded with it. And it's really poignant when you think of how small this bush rural pub is, and you've got 62 terrified hostages having to hunker down in this small space.
And the terror was about to increase. Ned was wounded in the arm and foot. Was the rebellion already over? Certainly at McDonald's Hotel, we've no sign of a rebel army coming to his aid, and no sign of the stables either.
What we've got looks like it's the back of the kitchen. You see this return here, and on the other side was an original wide-mouth fireplace. And what they've done is later on, you can see they've added in here to make it into a coal fire.
Adam, is this a terrible archaeological mistake? Are we in the wrong place, or didn't those stables exist at all?
Well, Tony, we are in the wrong place. Yeah, I admit that. Yeah, it's a kitchen, so we're actually seeing some human activity rather than just a place where the horses were. And obviously, the stables are much further to the south.
That's a brave defence of a trench in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Alex, you've got that familiar sceptical look on your face.
Partly because I'm sitting here looking at the fireplace, thinking of Paddy McDonald, the guy who owned this pub. Well, he's got the vote, he's making money.
He's got a lovely fireplace.
He's got a beautiful fireplace. Is this really the sort of guy who's going to want to take up arms against the state?
I have a sneaking suspicion that your vision of a revolution, of great bunches of people massing in order to help the Kellys is kind of disappearing.
They had to have a cup of tea, but this was the headquarters. The army, the Phantom Army, was out there.
But where? Seems there's no hope we'll find any archaeological evidence for Ian's rebel army, but I get the feeling he's not going to let it go that easily. Meanwhile, at Anne Jones' pub, Ned was bleeding from his wounds, and the police saw him leaving the inn. They fired directly at him, but nothing happened. Ned bellowed out, "You can't hurt me, I am in iron." Where was he heading? The others remained in the hotel, and now yet more bullet finds are starting to indicate some details on the dynamics of the unfolding firefight.
Now, remember, Tony, we've got this internal dividing wall in the inn separating the bar and the rear bedrooms.
Yeah.
Well, we've been finding on this side, on the bar side, these things we called lead splats, which we think at least some of them are projectiles that are coming in. So these are coming in from the police, we think. On the other side, in this bedroom area, we've been finding these cartridges and percussion caps. Think about the way battles happen. These are got to be coming in from the outside, therefore coming from the police. These have got to be being fired from the inside out and therefore coming from the gang.
So these could actually be cartridges that were fired by Dan Kelly and Steve Hart?
Exactly.
Meanwhile, Ian and Henry are getting really excited because Rupert Hammond, whose family is related to the chief policeman at the siege, owns a treasure that may verify a direct connection to Ned.
Well, I brought along Ned Kelly's rifle, and I understand you can prove something about it.
Well, hopefully we can. We've got some caps from the inn, which I think we've got a good chance of matching back, the marks on the caps, matching back to the shape of that hammer.
And if we do, we can prove that some of those percussion caps that they've found in the dig are from this rifle.
That's right.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let's go, let's do it.
Great.
Yeah.
All this time, blacksmith Gary, remember him, has been toiling on his set of Kelly armour. Of course, now he's almost finished it, you can guess what we're thinking of using it for. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, what would happen if you fired a present-day bullet into steel the same gauge as the one used to make Ned Kelly's armour. But that's a 21st century bullet. Ned Kelly was around in the 19th century. What would that have been like? Well, obviously, we're not going to use the original helmet to find out. Instead, we're going to rely on Gary's lovingly crafted reproduction. I'm Ned Kelly, I'm inside that, I've got loads of 19th century bullets hurtling towards me. What would that have felt like? Gentlemen, take it away. Well, as you can see, not one bullet has penetrated the armour, but imagine what it would have been like if you'd been inside there when the guys were firing. Imagine the buffeting, the bruising, the noise. It would have been like being hit time and time again with a sledgehammer. Rather you than me, Ned. And there's more. In the lab, Ian is beside himself. I thought your examination of the percussion caps would be, frankly, useless, but actually, Ian has got really excited about it. What is it you found?
On the two of the percussion caps, I've got parallel lines, presumably where the hammer has hit. On the test I did with that Colt revolving rifle, I've got two parallel lines, and they happen to be the same width apart. I think it is reasonable to suggest there's a possibility that these caps were fired in that revolving rifle.
Henry makes me laugh so much. It's reasonable to suggest there's a possibility. You're bouncing up and down. As far as you're concerned, where does this fit into the story?
Ned was firing the Colt revolving rifle and a bullet shattered his left arm. In there, out there, in there, out there. His left arm was gone. Soon afterwards, Constable Phillips heard a conversation between Ned and Joe in which Ned asked Joe to come and load his rifle for him. You've got the use of your arms, he said. Come and load for me. They take the fired percussion caps off the nipples, reload it, and there they are. We found them in the dig.
Now, I know that Henry wouldn't say this in a court of law, but as far as we're concerned, what we have here may well be percussion caps that belonged to Ned Kelly.
That's right.
As more and more bullets are uncovered, are pictures emerging all the time about what the innocent hostages inside had to endure. What we've done is to build a scale model of Ann Jones's pub up there, and we're going to see if we can work out how deeply the bullets might have penetrated the walls by, yes, you've guessed it, firing loads and loads of bullets at it. Are you ready, gentlemen? Fire!
There's one there.
Is this one here?
Yep, big one there.
Right, let's have a look around the other side. Cool, look at this. Look.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Have a look on this far side. Cool, look at that. It hasn't quite gone through, has it? Well, gentlemen, looks like we're getting penetration, but it's not going all the way through at that distance, is it? So this test looks like it supports the bullet evidence on site. The police fire fails to penetrate through to the back rooms where the boys are hunkered down. But where was wounded Ned Kelly? He'd been seen making off behind the hotel. Was he trying to run away? According to Ian, he was off to meet his army of sympathisers. Ian thinks they were gathered here, in the bush northeast of the hotel.
They're waiting for Ned. The gunfire's coming from the wrong place. The gunfire is supposed to be from the break in the line where the train was wrecked.
Because they're not waiting here for any action over there. They're waiting to hear the big explosion when the train goes over the track.
Things have gone wrong.
If there were that many people here, and they were armed, yeah?
Yep.
And there were how many police? About a dozen?
Only about a dozen.
Well, then why didn't this army just wipe out the police? Why did Kelly send them away rather than letting them go in and duff the coppers up?
Because he was not ruthless enough to be a successful rebel. These guys weren't supposed to go into a pitched battle. They were supposed to back up the armoured gang. That's how the thing came unstuck. He took it on his shoulders to keep these people out of it and go back and solve everything himself.
But when push comes to shove, are they really ready to pick up their guns and go into battle to establish a republic in the northeast of Victoria? This, I think, is our moment of proof where we see, actually, no, they're not going to make that leap.
Ned could have just melted into the night, but he didn't. When Ned had warned off the sympathisers, he went back to Ann Jones' hotel to rejoin the gang. As he entered, Joe Byrne was firing at the police. It's said that Joe stood up, took off his helmet to toast the gang, and was shot dead. A few hours later, police strung his corpse up on a door for photographers. Joe Byrne was only 23 years old. The media had arrived on the police train, and now as the sun came up, they began to record the scene. Police reinforcements had also arrived. So what happens next?
Just before the sun rose, Ned came staggering out across the slope here to attack 34 police.
It must have been an incredible sight.
Oh, amazing. I mean, he looked, one of the police said, he looked 9 feet tall. He's got his cloak, his oilskin trailing down into this mist and just indomitably staggering on into this semicircle of police who start firing at him. Ned just called, "I'm done," and just collapsed straight down onto his knees with 28 gunshot wounds in him.
After 16 months on the run, 3 murders and thousands of pounds stolen, Ned Kelly was finally in the hands of the law. Like breaking news, his capture was broadcast even as the siege continued. While Ned was taken to the station, Dan Kelly and Steve Hart were still in the hotel. Adam, what does this site tell us about the final hours of Dan's life?
Now, the remaining Kelly gang members realised that there was affording some form of protection here. And in those vulnerable moments when they're reloading their weapons, they're coming out from this area of killing zone, I should say, into here. They're reloading, and this is where we found all the cartridges and all the percussion caps. And so for the first time, we're able to actually pace out and spot the movements and map the movements of these guys in their last hours, 120 years after this gun battle.
We've established on the rifle range that police fire wasn't necessarily getting all the way through to them. But by now, the police reinforcements were in position and should have been able to get much closer. Right, we're 20 metres nearer now. You ready, gentlemen?
Yep.
Oh, Henry, look at that. Adam, look.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's good.
It's scored all the way down there.
Yeah.
And then gone through there.
Oh, there's another one there, look.
So we've got, what, 4 bullet holes, lots of shotgun scatter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, they're coming through now.
Look at this. You
Cool.
wouldn't want to be inside here.
Yeah.
Anything at the back?
This one's gone through here. Yeah, out the other side. Cool, look at this here. What gun do you reckon would have done that, Henry?
Be a martini if it's come this far through.
Wow. So where are we standing in the pub itself?
Well, Tony, we're standing actually in one of the rear rooms, and this would have been one of the bedrooms. On site, this is where we found some of the cartridges and percussion caps flush up against this rear wall.
Well, if we've proved nothing else, I think that we've shown that given this, that, and that, if there'd been anybody standing here, their lives would have been in complete danger. There's no doubt the gang had no protection. Escape was impossible as bullets went right through the hotel. They may already have been dead when around 3 p.m. on Monday, the police decided to end it once and for all. They set fire to the hotel. Using exactly the same wood as we had up at the range, we've recreated the little back room that Dan Kelly and Steve Hart would have been hiding in.
They were surrounded by alcohol, of course, which would have been an accelerant in any fire. They had a timber wall, which again would burn readily, lined with newspaper and hessian. Again, very flammable, and then you add to that furniture and mattresses.
As I'm sure you've guessed by now, we're going to set this alight, but what's going to intrigue me is how fast it starts to blaze, to see whether it would have been possible for anyone to have escaped.
This is where you take over.
OK. Adam, have you got the old gloves?
Yep.
Could you have a look at that? Presumably it's a piece of glass.
That's great, isn't it?
That's almost retained its original form. You can tell that it's a bottle, of course. It totally melted over the edge of the base plate of the wall there.
Do you think the hotel would have been that hot?
I think it would have been hotter. What we're finding on site is the glass has actually just changed from its original form into a liquid and has run and has bubbled, actually. So it's almost like pumice.
What about any human bodies that might have been in here?
But once the body's reached a certain temperature, the fats start to combust, and that's a slow but extremely intense burn. If the fire is intense enough, as this one would undoubtedly be, you can essentially cremate any remains, and all you'd really be left with would be bone fragments or some of the larger parts of the body.
And that's exactly what the police pulled out of the smouldering ruins of the hotel. The bodies of 19-year-old Dan Kelly and Steve Hart. It was a dreadful end to the siege. In fact, in many ways, it's never ended. What happened here remains an open wound. So what relation are you to Ned?
My great-grandmother was Ned's younger sister, Grace.
Do the family still feel bitter about the way he was treated?
Not only the way Ned was treated, the discrimination continued actively for at least 2 generations afterwards.
Really? Why? What happened?
Oh, it gave the family, I suppose, a bad name in some views, and yeah, there was a lot of opportunities that family members missed out on for no other reason than they were Kelly relatives.
Do you have a bad name? Do people cross over when you're walking down the street?
Not very many.
Ned ended up in Melbourne jail. In October, he was put on trial. After his conviction, Melbourne crackled with tension. There were rallies and meetings. It said that 60,000 people signed a petition for his reprieve. Berry was confronted by a torchlit demonstration of 1,500 people demanding a retrial. Berry, the radical premier, refused. He said there was not the slightest hope that Kelly would be let off. So, 5 months after his arrest at Glenrowan, on the 11th of November 1880, Ned Kelly was executed. It's amazing. I've rarely known a site where the emotions history can generate, like the archaeology itself, lie quite so close to the surface. And as if to really drive home the point, there's one more discovery. What you got, Corinna?
I've got this piece of burnt bone.
Bone? What kind of bone is it?
Well, looking at the location, Tony, looking at the fact that this is where Dan and Steve were observed before the fire took over, it's in the siege material, it's in this burnt deposit. I think this could be physical remains of Dan or Steve.
A shiver has gone right through me. Could I really be touching the charred remains of one of the Kelly gang?
Absolutely, I think it's really possible.
That's beyond our wildest dreams, isn't it?
It can't get much better than that, can you?
Phew. The debate about whether Ned was a common criminal or a revolutionary will carry on as long as we remember him. But what really intrigues me is, what did he think of himself? Clearly he was radicalised by his experiences, but unlike his government, I don't think he really knew what he was being radical about, other than a vague sense of wanting justice for himself and people like him. He also had a huge ego and loved the limelight, and I suspect he felt an obligation to act out this outlaw role he'd created for himself as dramatically as possible. Then, when his ambitious, confused and hopeless plan at Glenrowan went wrong, he could have escaped, but he didn't. He turned round, went back to his mates and fought to the end. He was brave, he was loyal, he was fiercely articulate, and I suspect he knew that he was engineering his place in history, which we've been lapping up ever since.
Join us next week to uncover the threat to Tasmania's wildlife paradise, as the survival of native animals hangs on the eradication program in Feral Peril, next Thursday night on ABC One.